Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen and today I have the mid-year book freakout tag. And I will admit, I'm a little bit behind on wrap-ups and giving reviews for everything I've been reading lately. Just a wild time in my life where I've had a little bit less time to film standard YouTube videos, but I really miss it. So I'm hoping that I can get back in the swing of things and share what I'm reading and talk to my camera like I love to do. But let's get into the questions for this tag. I do this every year, so it is time to do the damn thing. So, first question, my favorite book of the year. This was an easy pick for me this year. I had a couple like in my top 5 that I love, but this book is just Jalen in a book, and that is The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. I love this book with my entire heart. This is exactly what Jalen is looking for as a reader in a book form. It kind of, I don't know, it's a blend of everything that I love in fiction, kind of pulling from different things that I enjoy in terms of like form and also genre, kind of pulling from some films that I really like. I love horror generally, and this book kind of plays into that too, even though it's not something that I read in terms of genre fiction that often, but this book is Jalen to a T. I was emotional while reading it because I couldn't believe that I found the book, basically. Like, I was like, how is this real? Someone, meaning Bret, went into my brain, pulled everything I could want in a book and like put it here. And so it's a little bit like, it was jarring for me as a reader to find something that was like very much attuned to my interest. But basically, this follows a fictional Bret who is older and reflecting on his time at a prep school when he was 17 years old in the early 80s in Los Angeles. And he's in his group of friends. He is queer, and his friend group and himself are all quite privileged, and there's a new guy that comes to town named Robert Mallory, and Bret is instantly compelled or intrigued by him. But also in the background of all of this, there is a serial killer that's stalking Los Angeles and this group of friends, and Bret, in his lust and obsession and paranoia, starts to think that the new guy, Robert Mallory, is the serial killer. From there, the serial killer starts striking, and Bret is a very unreliable narrator. And we see his perspective in him trying to grapple with all of this and protect himself and his friends while also having this weird conflicting feeling towards Robert and some other people in his friend group. And basically, drama, action ensues. But why I love this book so much is that it plays with autofiction in terms of using a fictional Bret, kind of recounting this time in his life, while also giving you this very unreliable blend of like fact versus fiction. And then the plot just kind of pays homage, in my opinion, to like Scream. That is like my favorite horror franchise. I don't think he's directly paying homage to Scream, but it just reminded me of it in terms of this being very slasher heavy, and I love the meta commentary of the Scream series. It's my favorite movie series. So anyways, long story short, that is why I love this book so much. It has like my horror slasher lovingness in it, and then it also has autofiction, queerness, and it's just unputdownable, very pacey. It has like the vibes that I look for in a book. Like, it just was so immersive, and I don't know, it just captivated me from start to end, and it's a book that I'll constantly revisit. And I'm very sad that it's over because I feel like I won't find another experience like this again, or at least not for a while, that's so like exactly what I could ever want in a book. So that is The Shards. I also bought this edition from the UK because it looks very similar to my podcast art, and I just love the color scheme and the lettering going on. So I have these, favorite book of the year, hands down. I love this book. Next up, new release that you haven't read yet but want to. For this one, I have 2 books for different reasons. I really want to read the new Lori Moore novel, I Am Homeless If This Is Not My Home. I've been reading some criticism around this book, and it seems to just be really weird and kind of singular. I think it's about death and grief, but it's also quite funny. And I read this piece by Pearl Sagal in The New Yorker where she talks about how this is kind of like a critic-proof novel, or like Lori's attempt at writing that. So I'm just curious to see where I'll land on this. It seems very strange and something very singular on that front. So I'll be reading this soon. And then also another queer book that I really want to read is Mrs. S by Kate Patrick. This one I understand is about an affair at an English boarding school during the summer between 2 women. So it seems like a perfect like end of summer queer lust and longing novel that I love to read. So I'll definitely be picking this up soon. If you read this one, let me know. I've seen this one around like on Twitter and stuff, but haven't seen too many reviews of it, but the blurbs also slap. There's Lillian Fishman, Andrea Lawler, Julia Armfield. I will be reading this soon. Most anticipated book that's coming out in the next half of the year. This is an easy answer for me. It is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. She is one of my all-time favorite writers. I've read everything she's written. I love her podcast. I love her Twitter. I just love her personality and interviews. Like, she's just an author that I'm very floored by, and I feel like when I listen to her podcast or when I hear her talk about fiction, or even just in her narration in her books, I feel like her and I share very similar ways of thinking, and kind of in a similar way to Sheila Heti personally. Like, I have this connection to her writing that I find is kind of rare for me to find, and so it feels really special to me the way she thinks about philosophy and just existentialism, and like all of this is put in these narratives that are also very like queer and funny and dark, and it's just perfect. So excited to read Death Valley, which I think is about grief and is set in the desert, so I'll be reading that as soon as I have my hands on a copy. And then I'm also really interested to read the new Zadie Smith novel, The Fraud. This one is a little bit different for me, I think. It's historical fiction, which I don't read a lot of, but this one is set against a legal trial that divided Victorian England about who deserves to tell their story and who deserves to be believed. And so this is super buzzy. I know it's going to be everywhere this fall, and I want to be in the conversation. So we'll be reading this very soon as well. Biggest disappointment. My friend CJ had the same answer for this one, and for me it is August Blue by Deborah Levy. Unfortunately, I'm 0 for 2 on Deborah Levy. She's a writer that I feel like I should love, and I know many writers that I admire love her, so it might just be like time and place reading for me, or I just might not have found the book that would really speak to me personally yet. But August Blue, I didn't love it. It felt more, I don't know, it was a weird, very strange, sort of like mysterious novel about identity and doubles, but the story itself and like the plot, it didn't really stick with me. Like, I kind of have a hard time even remembering what happened in it, and it just didn't really stick in my brain, and I was let down a bit while I was reading it. So I'm sad to say I did not love that one, but I will be trying at least one more by her, because I don't know, I read August Blue and Things I Don't Want to Know, I think that's the name of it. So I think I want to try Cost of Living or maybe one other novel of hers and see if I can find another one that I gel with. But knowing how many people love her on here, especially many of my friends, I just really want to dig her work, and it feels weird to me that I haven't found one that I love yet. So that is August Blue. Next up, biggest surprise. This one has to be Burnham Wood by Eleanor Catton. I had never read her before, and when I looked into this book, I understood that it was like an eco-thriller, and I just wasn't really sure like what to expect from that. Like if it was going to be super pacey, and if it was more leaning into like the thriller side of things, like would I like it? But this book took me by surprise significantly. I could not, one, put it down. I loved the pace of it. I loved the plot. It was so interesting. But also what I loved the most about this is just the characters in the book. I think Eleanor Catton is doing this sort of like Jonathan Franzen-y thing with how she writes about people and like about psychology and the way that people interact and communicate and understand their surroundings, how that informs their actions, and putting that against this very like pacey, wild, by the end of it, thriller, kind of Shakespearean tragedy style story was just so fulfilling to me. So yeah, that one I adored. It was so much fun to read and took me by surprise. I didn't think I was going to like it that much, but I really enjoyed it. And then another surprise for me was Fuckboy by Shanthor Conroe. This is a book that I saw like widely panned last year when it came out, and I read it and I thought it was so good. Like I thought it was so interesting. It was such a unique, narrative voice, and the way that he kind of approaches autofiction, hearing his kind of process behind writing this book, meaning the author, was just really fascinating to me. And I feel like he's kind of in the conversation of other autofictional style authors that I really enjoy as well. So this one I thought was unfairly panned last year, and I think more people should give it a try. I think it's actually really smart and engaging, and I really enjoyed my time with that one. So new favorite author for me, this one I have to give it up for Emma Cline. I have a sort of like not strict rule where I say like I need to read 3 books by an author to call them like a favorite. Now I've read all of Emma Cline's published work, and I loved every single one of her books, so she is right up there with my favorite authors. I read The Guest by her, and it was just such a perfect like thriller adjacent read for me, following just this like interloper young woman who is trying to survive, and it's very like vibey, and Emma Cline's writing is just so excellent in terms of her observations. She's a very kind of like, she's a really good writer about writing into like liminal spaces and building tension through her characters, and I think this book is a really good example of that, and perfect for like a beach summer read if you want something where you can kind of just like sink into the narrative and the pages will just fly. So yeah, loved that one as well. Next question is newest fictional crush. Now this one, I don't really have crushes on fictional characters when I'm reading, but I will say 2 characters that I really loved was a book I read over the weekend, The Rachel Incident by Carolyn O'Donoghue, and I loved this book so much. It was very much filling the gap of like needing a Sally Rooney novel. It's quite different from Rooney, so it's not a direct comparison there, but it was a coming-of-age story set in 2009, Ireland, in Cork, and the main character is friends with this guy named James Devlin, who's a queer man, who is having an affair with a married professor. Also, the main character, Rachel, has a love interest later in the novel, and his name is James Carey. So there's two Jameses in the book, and I loved both these characters so much. I loved all three of the main characters in this book for many reasons, but if I had to pick like two crushes, I would say both Jameses were very much like the closest I can find to a crush. Yeah, so those two for sure, and I love that book, and it just came out, and I think many people who watch this channel would really like that book as well if you're looking for kind of a breezy, but also quite serious, but also light coming-of-age story about friendship. It was lovely, and I couldn't put it down, so that was a Rachel incident. New favorite character. I have three characters that are all different, and I love them all. So the first one being Blanche from Pure Cosmos Club, who is a very human-like dog that is the star, in my opinion, of Matthew Binder's latest novel, which I really loved, and I interviewed him on the podcast. So definitely check that out if you're looking for some new satire about art and fashion and just a really absurdist look at these topics. I really love that book, and it's out on an indie press, and I really hope more people pick that book up because I think it's very, very strong, including the character of Blanche. She is incredible. Next, I have The Black Hole from Ripe by Sarah Rose Etter, another recent podcast guest. The Black Hole isn't necessarily a character, except it is, and I think what Sarah's doing in terms of exploring the science behind black holes and putting that in a fictional form, but also making it a character that follows our main character, it kind of imposes a symbol that can mean whatever the reader wants it to mean. And I thought it was so clever and creepy and just a really interesting character that I haven't seen in fiction really before. So The Black Hole was a star for me. And the last character that I love is X from Biography of X by Catherine Lacey. She is a chameleonic, iconoclastic artist that is at the focus of this book, and the novel is told from the perspective of her grieving wife, and her wife is trying to write X's biography, and so we don't really know too much about X except from the accounts of various people that knew X, and the narrator, who is her grieving wife, or widow, and I think it's so interesting how Catherine Lacey composes this character, which is just a complete mystery, and what it means to know someone, what it means for a person to have a history. I just think X is so interesting and someone I always think about in terms of character. And Catherine did some really interesting things with that character and building a whole novel around her that's actually a biography, but it's really a novel. I like that meta construction there. So those are my three favorite characters: Blanche, The Black Hole, and X. A book that made you cry. I haven't cried much this year, I don't think, but a book that did make me cry and made me just deeply emotional was I Will Greet the Sun Again by Akash Kabushani. This book comes out in, I think, just like 2 weeks on August 1st. I have a podcast coming with him, and it was just such a lovely book. It's in my top 5 of the year. It is a queer coming-of-age story about a young Iranian-American boy who's trying to come of age in America, and his relationship with his two brothers and his parents, and the fraught relationships that are told in the story about all of those dynamics, and the narrator, Kay, his path to becoming a writer. The prose is just so exquisite. It's so interestingly structured. It's pacey. It has a really interesting story, and just Kosh is very much obsessed with like language, and I love his just use of language in this book, and talking to him about how he wrote this book and his thoughts on fiction and his path towards publishing his debut was just so moving. And so it was one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. So definitely keep an eye out for this if you want an intro to the book. Also, this is published under Hogarth, and if anyone's been following my channel or my socials, I just started a job at Penguin Random House last week, and this is a Hogarth release, and I had already had this planned for the podcast before I learned about getting the job, or even before applying. And so it was just that week I found out I got the job, and then I interviewed him that week as well. So I was already like an emotional wreck, and then he's just the sweetest person ever. And so it was just like a lovely experience all around. And I love the book. It was just like a perfect amalgamation of events in 1 week. So I hope you'll pick it up when it publishes in a few weeks. So that is I Will Greet the Sun Again. Next, a book that made you happy. I was looking through my list and I couldn't really find something that is exactly like made me happy per se, but a book that filled me with immense joy from reading it was Couplets by Maggie Milner. This book is in my top 5 as well. This is just so, it's just everything to me. I love this book so much. I can't stop thinking about it. It is a book that blends prose with poetry, which is not something that I read a lot of, but It's looking at the rhyming couplet as a form in the book while also exploring queer desire. What I really love about this book too is how it blends all of these things with like criticism and considering what she's doing with form in the book. And this book just blew my mind. I couldn't believe how good it was, and I hadn't really read a book that contained like couplets, so it was very like romantic in terms of that form being contained throughout. It was also very like steamy read and just very, very, very smart, and I just loved my time reading it. It got his couplets, made me very happy. Most beautiful book, I have to give this one to this special paperback edition of Pure Color by Sheila Heti, one of my favorite books of all time, one of my favorite writers of all time. But this came out on Independent Bookstore Day. It's an exclusive edition, and it has a different font with the gold foiling at the top, and then it also contains, it's signed, and then it has an extra, there's the Heti, and it contains a story at the end as well. But this is one of my favorite book covers ever, and having a little bit different style for the paperback, I had to add it to my collection. It's just a beautiful, beautiful object. Love this book. Alrighty, and so books that I need to read by the end of the year. I have so many books I need to read by the end of the year that I'm not going to answer this question directly, but I will say I have some exciting things in the works for my podcast, Reading the Room. I hope you all are tuning into it. It's my favorite thing that I've ever done, like ever, especially with books. It's just my child, my love. I love doing that podcast and talking to authors. It's my favorite thing in the world. So a couple of forthcoming episodes that I am very excited about include Justin Torres, author of Blackouts. I read his debut novel, We the Animals, a couple weeks back, and I loved it, so I'm very excited to read that one. And I know a lot of you are excited about that book as well. I have Mona Awad coming on again, repeat guest. Very excited for that. For her new book, Rouge, which sounds excellent. I also have Lauren Groff coming on the podcast in support of The Vaster Wilds, which I'm seeing like major praise for in terms of like it probably being the one that's going to win her prizes. So I'm very excited about that. Those are just 3 forthcoming episodes that I want to tell you about, and I hope you enjoyed this mid-year freakout tag. Let me know what your favorite book of the year is so far. What are you looking forward to coming out for the rest of the year? There's a lot of exciting books coming out in fall, so lots of reading to be had. But anyways, I will catch you all in the next one, which will probably be a wrap up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye.